We're also doing a lot of work getting people registered to vote. That was a big thing in San Juan County, which is where the Navajo Nation is. There was intense racial gerrymandering, so that for decades, the majority Native population was not represented in the county commission, and so their voices were not heard. This has been turned over through the courts. They have new boundaries that were set, and so it could be the first time that we see two Natives of the 3 county commissioner seats happening. That could be something that we see in 2018. So we see places where we can actually make a good dent in the midterms.
Do you think that turnout will be higher? You said turnout's typically, it's low all over the country in midterm years typically. And, if it's low in Utah in general, there's a lot of really rural parts of Utah. Do you think that it will be higher this year?
I hope it is. We've got 2 things going on here. So Mitt Romney, former presidential candidate, he is running for a U.S. Senator position here. And this could go both ways. This could be like everyone wants to turn out and vote for Mitt Romney because, wow, it's Mitt Romney. Or they're like, he's going to win. There's no reason for me to turn out. I'm really interested. We won't really kind of get a handle on that until probably later down the road. But I think that has it will have an influence, at least, in that. I do think these ballot initiatives will get more people out. And this is kind of somewhere where we've positioned our campaign, is that as opposed to maybe some other campaigns that are trying to find some like moderate stances to fight over or whatever it is and try and win votes that way. What we're looking at with my campaign is trying to activate that base that if they were the ones who turned out in the presidential year and they show up again in the midterm, we're in a fantastic spot. And the main argument is just like, why would you turn out to vote for someone who doesn't have a vision or doesn't excite you? And so we've been talking about the things that are just the most exciting, the things that we think can actually happen, a good vision for our society. So because of that, we've focused the campaign mostly on values. And this goes back to my own background as a Navajo and also from this kind of religious upbringing. There's this notion in Navajo philosophy called k'eh, and that means like relationality or relationships. So once you and I find out our clans, then there is a relationship that exists and a responsibility in how we're supposed to act one to another. In kind of Western ideas, we call this like social responsibility or mutual responsibility, something like that. And this makes a lot of sense when you frame policies through that lens, because when I start talking to some people who are in the middle or whatever, or more on the right, and I say, hey, Medicare for all, Medicare for all. For those on the left, for Democrats and liberals, they're like, yeah, that's great. We love this. But for those on the other side, they're like, this is going to cost a lot of money. Why are we going to pay into this? And unless I use that value framework, when I say that we need to be looking out for each other, this makes sense as human beings. We have empathy and love towards one another. It starts to activate those frames. And that's when people start to be like, oh, okay, I can see why a Medicare for all or a single payer healthcare system makes sense in this situation. So what we're trying to do is lay the groundwork of some of that frame activation through a value system. And it's different. I think it's a different approach that Democrats haven't really caught on to here in Utah, at least.
So you are a sociology professor, and as I listen to you talk, I'm hearing a lot of terms that sound like they're informed by sociology. Do you think that your training in sociology is driving some of how you frame your campaign?
Oh, yeah. I've talked to people and I'm just told them like, hey, this is just like teaching an intro to sociology class, except for that this is a much bigger class. You know, before I said the biggest class I taught was like 300 students at a state university. Now it's like 700,000 people. That's a pretty big class. But really it's talking about how we're dealing with the tendencies of our society, which is focused on this like hyper individualism and consumerism, like this really conspicuous consumption. And what sociology does is it says, okay, let's take a step back. Is individualism the only way in which we can understand society? And clearly it's not. We have to look at different kinds of systems that are in place and social forces. And so the example I kind of give for this is when I'm talking to folks, I say, all right, the American dream, if it is individually based and if that is a concept or framework we want to use, then that means that however hard you try, success will be directly correlated with that. So if you try hard, you'll get tons of money or whatever, however you want to define success. If you are lazy, then nothing will happen. We all kind of agree, yes, that's the idea of the American dream. And then I say, okay, what about my grandparents? They're Navajo. They live on the Navajo reservation. They don't have running water. They don't have electricity. Despite the fact that they work extremely hard, they will never have electricity or running water. It's not an individual thing. And what's really kind of ironic about this is that the Glen Canyon Dam and the hydroelectric power that's produced there, which is like a stone's throw away, you see the power lines pass by where they're at and goes towards larger cities. This is the systemic type of thing that I start talking to people about. So if we have economic inequality, and this is something that we as sociologists talk about a lot too, if we have this economic inequality and it's growing, it means that the rungs between these different social classes then grow further apart, which means it's going to take a lot of individual effort to move from one social class to another. And really that's the thing, is that social mobility in the United States is what has decreased along with that inequality, meaning that you can work super hard as an individual, but the system is rigged against you. And that kind of idea is something that I like to talk about and we discuss thoroughly when in an intro to sociology class. The other major kind of concept I love talking about, which is informed by sociology, is this notion of cultural hegemony. And this is the idea that most people just cock their head like, what did you just say? Like, I know. Don't worry. Let me tell you all about it. Cultural hegemony is the way in which people in power have a system of beliefs. That system of beliefs keeps them in power, and they in turn push that system of beliefs onto other people. And that system is not in their best interest, but they believe that it is. So the example that I give is like, imagine you're on the ship Titanic, and we saw the Titanic. I think I was like 16 or 15 or whatever when it came out back in the 90s. And there's this scene where the ship is going down. The first class passengers are scrambling to try and get to the lifeboats. But underneath in the hull, they have put a gate up and they do not allow any of the passengers to come through. This is pretty much the idea of cultural hegemony. It is keeping the third class passengers away from the first class passengers to live. But in a cultural hegemony, it's like them saying, okay, third class passengers, it's in your best interest to go back into your cabins below, lock the door, and patiently wait for the oncoming, rushing frigid waters of the Atlantic to drown you to death, so that we at the top can make our way onto the lifeboats and tell everyone where the boat has sunk. This is the kind of situation that we're in right now, where the prevailing kind of economic system and political system is set up so that it helps those at the top of our country and completely just pulls the shades over the rest of our eyes. And yet we think, oh, this is totally going to work for us. So this is kind of another sociological idea that I like to talk to people about on the campaign trail.
You have a couple of little kids. I think you have 2 daughters. Is that right?
Yeah.
So I'm wondering how, people often talk to female candidates about raising kids while they're running and that sort of thing. And we don't talk to male candidates as much about that. And so I like to do that. So I'm wondering what it's like to be running for office in this day and age, this moment that we're in America, having 2 daughters, and how that sort of informs your positions on issues, how that informs the kind of candidate that you are.
Well, I can say it's not easy. My wife and I are both professors at the community college, but we're just starting out. And we have, like a lot of other millennials, we had the general fortune of going to school using a lot of student loans because school's not very affordable, and we're both kind of first-generation college students. So we have that to deal with. And so we're both kind of like stay-at-home parents, but also at the same time working parents. Mm-hmm. And we try to keep things as equal as possible. And so that kind of has, I mean, it has definitely influenced the way that I look at politics because, you know, as millennials and as people of color, my wife is from Venezuela, like we view the world differently, but it's a view that is becoming much more prevalent within the United States. One of the things that I'm really pushing for is, if I get into Congress, is paid parental leave. So we're looking at the, I'm saying at least 16 weeks of paid parental leave once you have a kid or through an adoption, because it makes no sense to me that you just have a few weeks off, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, whatever it is, of unpaid leave, and then you can go back to work. We just had these two recently. Like, my one daughter is 2 years old. My other daughter is 3 months old. We timed it so that we could have the summer off with them. And luckily, we are in the kind of profession where, because we work during the year, the contract pays us over the months that we don't actually hold school in session. So we were able to kind of have a paid parental leave. And it was awesome. It's great. And I can't imagine anyone having to go back to work before the 3.5 months of a summer. Like, I wish we had like 6 months off. It would have been awesome to spend that kind of time with them. And yet the kinds of people that I interact with and study as a sociologist, I see that they have, at best a few weeks, and then they have to go back to work, because if they miss any more time off, they can't afford to live because it's not paid for them. So it's definitely something that influences us. Also, looking at the environment. This is something that's really important to me, and especially looking at my daughters. Every single year, and every time we go outside, it's like, man, it is so hot. This month was the hottest month on record, or last year was the hot, it just keeps increasing. And the people in office, the people I'm kind of running against, they're not going to be around in 10, 20 years. They're going to be long gone. I'm still going to be here. My daughters are still going to be here. We have to deal with this climate crisis. I would much rather debate my opponent on the merits of a privatized system of tackling climate change, or kind of a social government infrastructure type system of solving climate change, than having the debate of whether it's real or not. It's just ridiculous. So, I mean, having daughters so young is definitely one of the things that has motivated and influenced the way that I look at the campaign.
Yeah, with my first son, I had to go back to work after 9 weeks, and even that was so hard.
I bet. No, I bet.
So hard. And that's with leaving him with my husband, who was an adjunct professor at the time and was able to stay home with him and, could bring him to me at work to nurse him. But yeah, I mean, it's really tough to go back to work that early.
Oh, I think it was awful. I wish I could be the stay-at-home dad. Like, I've always wanted to be that. I think we have a lot of fun, but we both work. It's just the nature of things these days.
Well, is there anything else that you want to make sure that our listeners know about you or your district?
I think something really important about this campaign is about public lands. I mentioned before about Bears Ears National Monument. This is kind of it's the point of resistance, I think. An actual place of resistance for where we're going to see how we deal with our public lands. I know that people come to Utah from all over the nation, mostly to see its beautiful landscapes and to get away from wherever they're from and just enjoy the scenery. Most people don't come over to Utah to dig it up for oil or coal or whatever kind of natural resources, because there's a lot out there. They don't come for that. And so we're sitting here at a crossroads because Bears Ears National Monument has been rescinded and shrunken, and also the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument. There are large amounts of public lands that have now been opened to resource extraction. And this is a problem, because I know that most Utahns and a lot of Americans want to make sure that these lands stay protected. And so that is one thing that sets me apart from my opponent, is that I am definitely